Thank you so much. Figure out where to. I'm so glad that you all sang that song to begin. That was the song I was going to open with to recite a little bit of, and so I don't have to do that. But I've been, and I don't sing so well unless other people are singing too, or I'm in the car alone. And so, but that song I've been listening to and singing since the fourth grade when I first heard it. The school that I transferred to from North Carolina to South Carolina had just done that play, and so the children were singing it, and I just memorized it and loved it. And that's not, I wrote down my talk so that I won't ramble. I tend to ramble. Okay, so let me get to that. My goal is to provide some reflections and to read a few poems and to give you all a chance to talk, because I know that the dialogue after a talk is always so good. And so there's another song I want to say that started playing in my mind as well. It's a traditional song, a traditional Appalachian hymn, the one that, let me just back up. I'm having trouble with my glasses, but my other glasses are in the car. So, okay, let's start all over. Okay, so there's another song that started playing in my head when I started thinking about what to say today, a traditional Appalachian hymn that was collected and reprinted, thus preserved for us by a folklorist in 1933 when he asked a traveling evangelist, Annie Morgan, to sing it to him over and over and over again so that he could write it down. And it is I Wonder as I Wander. And you probably all know that song. It's a lovely song just to sing. I wonder as I wander out under the sky. Traveling, wandering, wondering. Annie Morgan had plenty of time to reflect on her thoughts regarding her spiritual tradition. And if I had to say only one sentence today and then sit down, I would say that I wonder as I wander. And so as I go through this little talk, you'll see that I often think I should just sit down. But there's a reason for that. You'll understand by the time I'm done. So I'm going to read a couple of poems as I go through. And this is a poem I call Near Eve for different reasons. Obviously for almost evening, and obviously in kinship with even the garden before the fall. And this is a poem I wrote because when I first started hiking solo some years ago, I had this ritual where I would take an apple, and this may be, you can't do this in some places, leave no trace, but in some places you can toss the apple so that some creature can finish it off for you. And maybe even in the wilderness there's debate about that. But so and I guess even before I read it, because this is one of the early ones, I'll say, how did I start hiking in earnest? I've always gone for walks. I've always spent time in the woods since I was a little girl, but one day I was on the way to Grace Healthcare to see my mother, where I spent every Saturday morning and every day just about for years and years. And that day ended up at Linville Gorge, which is not that close to Grace Healthcare or Abingdon. And it was just wonderful. I realized that I could go off into the woods alone and still take care of her, and that the two would be even better. And so that's when I began that ritual of taking the apple. So, near Eve. Sometimes I am higher than a hawk. Sometimes the hawks are higher, circling me while I eat an apple alone on a rocky summit near trees. And beetles click and clack over my shoulders like Adam would if he were here, chiding, "Don't throw that core off the cliff." So when we're out walking or wandering, it's inevitable that we do that with our thoughts, no matter what we're thinking, no matter what we attach our wandering thoughts to, because the Spirit is what animates us, no matter how we conceptualize the Spirit or whether we ground it as a function of the mechanics of the brain or a function of something more ethereal. And I fall in both camps. So when we are wandering someplace wild, if even a little wilder than where we usually go, as to Kroger or down a sidewalk in town, we can sometimes be more thoughtful, even as we clear our heads and let some thoughts go. There is nobody there, no figurative or literal Adam to distract us. Even if we're with our friends who are there in kinship with us as we walk. Clearing our heads, we can wondering, we can surprise ourselves as we marvel at, well, whatever makes us want to marvel. Frogs, birds, leaves, the sound of hawks, the scent of decaying leaves. This can make me marvel. I feel sometimes it's easier for me to be out with the frogs. I work hard to be around people. And every year I get a little better at that. So you've read Henry David Thoreau, who in Walden said, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived." Living there in his woods, wandering at times within them, he came to lessons that made him all the more committed to social justice. We do not have to move entirely to the woods to learn some of the lessons that Thoreau did. We can get out now and then if we can. The woods, the wild, these places we think of as uncivilized, even, the woods beside the house where I live, which is sandwiched between houses, can help us as we marvel, as we wonder, to get in touch with what some call wild mind, which is something that can come in handy when we're back where we need to be most of the time. Wild mind, poet Gary Snyder says, and if you, it was an interview shared in the Sun, but widely reprinted, means elegantly self-disciplined, self-regulating. And that's interesting to think of. Wild is self-disciplined and self-regulating. And that's what wilderness is, he said. Nobody has a management plan for it. The mind can be as elegantly composed as a wild place, and wild or a little wild, with places that can help us compose ourselves. Perhaps this is because, as writer Terry Tempest Williams writes in Finding Beauty in a Broken World, that the memory of wild nature is held within the nucleus of every living cell. Our bodies, Williams reminds us, remember wholeness in the midst of fragmentation. We need to remember that, this is me now, no matter where we are standing. Having stood so much in the middle of some forest or some dense woods, I feel that I can remember what she reminds us even when I'm at work or standing in my living room at home, wondering if I should worry about all the dust or the snakeskin that I find by the hearth, or which is a different story. Sometimes a house sort of is like being outdoors too, if you're the kind of housekeeper I am. So, which I say is Bunny's about to. Don't worry, the snake is gone. So fragmentation is something that is easy to feel when we're pulled so many ways by so many roles that we have to play. Getting outside helps with perspective. We can feel less small and less large at the same time. We can find a way to feel whole. We can listen to Annie Dillard, who said in Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, "Go into the gaps. If you can find them, they shift and vanish too. Stalk the gap, squeak into a gap in the soil, turn and lock and unlock, more than a maple, a universe." This is how you spend this afternoon, she says, and tomorrow morning and tomorrow afternoon. Spend the afternoon. You can't take it with you. I have to say, I'm not as complicated as Thoreau or Dillard or any of these people I've been quoting, but I'm my own kind of explorer, and I think that's a lesson in all of this. We all need to be our own kind of explorer, negotiating our own personal relationships with time in the woods or modestly wild places. Perhaps that will make it sound easier for others to do it. Or you can't hear? Oh, maybe I should move over here. Oh, it's the speaker. Okay. All right. So, well, maybe it's just sort of to, well, I'll stop looking for a metaphorical reason for it. Okay. I could probably analyze why they're static, but I'll come back. Okay. Everything is for a purpose, right? So, okay. So I guess I'm saying I'm a simple person. I don't go on journeys across mountains for days on end. The way Matsuo Basho did so many centuries ago in Japan, I teach his work and him in a class, and my students go for walks, short walks. You can learn a lot even in a short walk. I haven't gone on a through hike on the Appalachian Trail. I've always had to work. I can't imagine leaving the world for 3 months, 6 months, or a year. But I love to get out when I can. And I also have never really wanted to uproot my life and hike, say, the Pacific Coast Trail, the way Cheryl Strayed talks about in Wild. Although I admire her very much, and I admire people like very, very much. And I do have a few modest goals related to my hiking life. There's so much close to home that it's easy for me to get outside, where hiking, as I say, makes me slow down and make sense of things. It lets me slow down a minute. I'm going to slow down and read another poem here that I wrote after a hike with Bunny up to Gentry Falls in the Cherokee National Forest near Laurel Bloomery. It's one of those hikes I take every year, and so I love that hike. It's creek crossings and a waterfall at the end, and every season it's special. So this is called Gentry Falls. Let me start, it's not a bobcat. Okay. Gentry Falls. A bobcat stepped on a rock by the creek, its paw prints like a postcard from paradise. Step into this forest, the postcard said, and savor all signs. That was a sign, and so were all the creek crossings, a sign that we were inserting ourselves into a scene out of a day of a year that knew too much morning, back there, back in town. Here, everything was alive, even everything that was dead. Even a decay pungent with a scent of deep wood smelled like hope. And then on a tree by the falls, so many initials carved by visitors, a tombstone, but not a tombstone, more like a totem pole, one more sign. So wild places serve as my muse, and that makes me think that even as I stand up here, thinking I have something to say, I really have nothing to say, really, that you don't know, that you couldn't find out because you have your own muses. The woods will speak to you in different ways. And I think sometimes, as much as I try to say something, there's not that much new under the sun. But this is one thing I do know. I like to go in the woods. You may too. I also know that even when I'm in the house, when the light falls near the end of the day, I go out and stare at it. And every night I go out and stare at the moon before I go to sleep. And in the morning I always open the door and walk out and look at the sun. And I feel very lucky to be able to sometimes get outside even longer, outside the house, here and there and everywhere. So when I'm saying that I like to find my muse outside, I think that y'all know that book, If You Meet Buddha on the Road, Kill Him, which is an awful title. I don't know if it would go today, but I've read it and I understand what it means. It means I guess what I'm saying is the Buddha would say the muse resides inside me. That all the wild that I seek when I go trooping down the Appalachian Trail, the Creeper Trail, or some wilderness area, that's already inside me, just in wild and wondrous. And what it is outside makes me maybe within the company of trees, birds, bears, flowers, all those creatures of the universe, etc. All of that helps bring out what's already inside me, that wild mind, that wild place, that part of me that's in touch with, I guess, what came before and what will keep going on, I hope, if we take care of of the world, of the earth. So it makes me feel integrated. It makes me feel makes sense. And so the day before I had major surgery for my invasive cancer, which I was also happy to get a diagnosis for because I was so tired for a couple of years and I kept going to doctors thinking, is this what it's like getting old? And I wasn't even old. Anyways, you do get more energy. Okay, so the day before I had that surgery and started all this stuff, and even through the whole time I kept walking. So I went for a hike in Franklin County, and this is a poem I wrote. And one thing about these poems, when you write them, they're about the woods, but they're really about me. And so since I've told you, this is a hike I took the day before surgery, and for breast cancer, you'll understand the imagery. Tracks. There are all kinds and all kinds of shapes, and some lead to layers or beaver dams, and some lead to roads that wind through the mountains like veins. Others take you into fields past Jimson weed and last season's corn, where raccoons forage for grains as yellow as sun. Somewhere in the woods, beside the cornfield, gone the weeds, a brittle field with patches of color, a deer that left its tracks hides from hunters, its tracks sunk with fear. Somewhere else, where nobody can see its tracks, a heron flies out from a creek into the air. And we keep walking, looking up and looking down, watching the heron fly away, and watching how a fox could be here and gone before our feet kick the dirt from the parking lot, down the hill, past the white blaze, up to the red blaze trail, where somebody tied a pink ribbon to a tree. So the deer I mentioned here, its track sunk with fear. Who's to say the deer was fearful? Probably I was fearful. But I kept walking, and the whole time I went through all that, my friends kept me walking, my son kept me walking. And although I did say that I promised that I would not hike alone, during that time, I promised that I wouldn't, because I love to go out in the woods all by myself, and I only cheated once. And I, after I was out there a bit, I did come back. But this is the poem I wrote. I'm glad I cheated once at one time, and after I was out a bit, I thought maybe I shouldn't get too far. I'm not seeing a lot of people. One thing about being in the woods alone, you're alone, but even sometimes I've been in the midst of, a real wilderness area, and I get cell service, or I run across another hiker and I say, am I really right here? I have a map, my cell phone, and 16 other aids. Okay, so here's the poem I wrote the time I cheated. Bear calls. I hear them in the early spring. Bear calls up on the side of the ridge, a sound reminiscent of robin, but as jagged as a tree stump gnawed by beaver. Just yesterday, I stopped in my tracks, certain I was hearing a long extinct bird or a very hoarse robin, its calls as large as a dinosaur's, until I realized it was just another bear. It saw me before I saw it. This is what always happens. Before I realize I am being blessed, the bear turns toward its sanctuary, leaving me alone in the woods, looking up. So reality is hard to describe. As soon as you add an adjective, you've tweaked it, and as soon as a verb changes its mind, reality shifts. So any choice of word, any attempt to make sense of my experience is it's just an attempt to say something about which we can't really speak. You just have to go there and be there and feel it. And I'll pause and say, who knows if that's a bear. One thing I like about being in the woods is sometimes, I'll pull out my app and say, oh, let's see if I can identify this or that. But other times, I really put aside all of that in handbooks and stuff, and I try to study what I'm seeing or what I'm hearing so that I'll remember it when I go back home and try to figure it out later. when I'm away from it, so that I really truly experience it in the moment rather than trying to turn it into an intellectual exercise while I'm there. So maybe outside, alone with my thoughts, I can let my thoughts run free until they're ready to come back to me. The way I'm always able to find my way back to the car, even if I get lost. So lost that I have to find my bearings to figure out what to do to get out of the woods before dark. And the best thing is to just hike really early, so if you get lost, you will get back to the car before dark. That's my cardinal rule, and that's happened twice, really. So maybe outside when I'm lost, I'm wandering literally, yet completely focused inside my head, examining every tree, every sound, every clue, until I figure out what to do. And whatever happens, I'll put it in a poem. But Joyce Kilmer, is right. There's no poem as lovely as a tree. So lately, to see more trees and to expand my horizons, I've taken on what is called the Blue Ridge Outdoors Dirty Dozen Wilderness Challenge. And you can too. So I read about this in October, and I'm behind because it started in September, and I can't cheat and go back and turn in pictures of previous hikes in wilderness areas. I have to start anew. Anyway, I'll catch up. The idea is that you sign up to pledge that you'll hike just 10 miles over the course of a year, which is harder than it sounds, and a minimum of 12 wilderness areas in the southeast. And some of these areas are in a swamp and just water. I mean, so it's a real challenge, and some are hard to find. So you share your experiences by sending in photographs and a commentary each time you visit an area, and your mileage. And one goal of this is to bring attention to the 50th anniversary of the American Wilderness Act. And another, obviously, is to get us outside a little bit more. Some of you may remember that President Lyndon Johnson signed the Wilderness Act into being in 1964. And what he did when he did that was designate what constitutes a wilderness. So I want to read that to kind of end up. A wilderness, in contrast with those areas where man in his own works dominate the landscape, is hereby recognized as an area where the earth and its community of life are untrammeled by man, where man himself is a visitor who does not remain. A visitor who does not remain is how I like to think of myself when I go on these hikes. And I think that I guess that's what I'm trying to say today, is that there's a lesson in that 10 miles over a course of a year, even if you can be in the woods for a 10-minute hike, an hour hike. Sometimes I think I don't have 4 hours. Well, 15 minutes is good. At work, I usually very often will spend my whole lunch break just out wandering in the woods behind the college, and then I go back to my desk. So